has been quite a year in Washington. So let's rewind the tape and look at the year. At the beginning of the year, President Biden ended the federal government's COVID-19 emergency measures. Then in February, a Chinese spy balloon traversed the entire United States, and President Biden had to decide what to do about it.
On Wednesday, when I was briefed on the balloon, I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible.
The whole incident led to a major rift between the US and China, two nuclear powers that had to find a way back to diplomacy. Biden met with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, outside of San Francisco in November to try to reestablish those communication ties. Biden stood steady on Ukraine and pushed for Congress to send more money for Kyiv to defend itself from Russia's aggression. Now on Israel. Biden came out very strong in support of the Israeli government after it was attacked by Hamas on October 7th.
In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves.
But he's facing pressure within his own party to call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
We need a permanent ceasefire now. We need to end the mass murder of Palestinian civilians and Palestinian children.
So we demand ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
So to push forward on his support for Israel and Ukraine, Biden made two dangerous trips. One, he took a night train into Kyiv. Kyiv is still within rocket distance of Russian artillery, and met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky inside Kyiv. And then also, shortly after the October 7th attacks, he flew into Israel to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This was also the year that President Biden announced that he was going to run for a second term. He announced his candidacy formally in April.
That's why I'm running for re-election.
And he doesn't have any major challengers on the Democratic side. The primaries begin early next year. That will create a major moment where Biden's campaign will try to set up a contrast. Assuming that former President Trump is the Republican nominee, Biden will try to describe to voters that he's been a steady hand in government for 4 years and that Donald Trump would bring back a pattern of disruption. All right, let's talk about Congress this year. Republicans took over the House at the beginning of the year, and there's been a lot of infighting all year. It got off to a rocky start. It took 15 rounds of voting for Kevin McCarthy to be elected the Speaker in the first place.
A Speaker has not been elected. 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 It's 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 not been elected.
Well, Republicans in the House finally elected a speaker post-midnight early on Saturday after Kevin McCarthy acquiesced to the demands of the most extreme members of his caucus.
But he was ousted 9 months later. There were contentious speaker votes in October, and Mike Johnson is now the Speaker of the House.
McCarthy didn't even want to finish out his term, and after 17 years in Congress, said he would resign at the end of the year.
While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much.
And this was also a year when the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on Ticketmaster and whether it was acting like a monopoly. It was Taylor Swift's concert and the trouble that her fans had getting tickets that forced the Senate to take up this issue. The senators took that moment to use a lot of Taylor Swift song title puns.
As a ode to Taylor Swift, I will say, we know all too well.
She's cheer captain, and I'm on the bleachers. Nice of Taylor Swift to have written a song about this very situation.
A few million Taylor Swift fans would respond, "This is why we can't have nice things."
People seem to think that's somehow a solution. I think it's a nightmare dressed like a daydream.
Ticketmaster ought to look in the mirror and say, I'm the problem. It's me.
In May, House Republicans threatened to let the U.S. default on its debt, and after a lot of brinksmanship, Republicans and the White House came to a deal that prevented the U.S. from defaulting. They punted the ceiling fight to after the presidential election and the beginning of 2025. In September, House Republicans decided to launch a formal impeachment inquiry against Joe Biden.
Today, I am directing our House committee to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden.
House Republicans are trying to make the case that Joe Biden somehow profited from his son Hunter Biden's overseas business deals, but so far there hasn't been evidence of that. Also in September, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, who represents New Jersey, was indicted on federal corruption charges. When prosecutors filed the charges, they also showed photographs of gold bars and stacks of cash that prosecutors say were bribes to Menendez.
And then there's George Santos. The first-term Republican from New York was expelled from Congress in December. It took 3 votes to get there. In the end, 105 Republicans joined Democrats in the House to expel Santos. There were concerns over him fabricating his resume, lying about his past, and also he faces federal charges for money laundering, theft of public funds, and making false statements. Santos denies wrongdoing.
The disgraced former congressman is receiving hundreds and hundreds of requests to record personalized videos on the website Cameo.
My favorite TS song is definitely going to be Trouble. I knew you were trouble when you walked in. That's me. Bye!
There were big changes in the Senate this year. Senator Dianne Feinstein died after a groundbreaking 30 years in the Senate. California Governor Gavin Newsom appointed LaFonza Butler to fill her Senate seat. Butler has been a powerful union organizer in the state and was the head of Emily's List, a group that works to elect women candidates who favor abortion rights. Joe Manchin said he wouldn't run for re-election. This is a big deal because the West Virginia senator is a Democrat who's been winning in a largely red state, and his bowing out of the race in 2024 could lead to another Republican seat being added in the Senate. The Senate is narrowly divided right now, and that could affect the balance of power.
Also this year, the campus debates over free speech came to Washington. Universities have been criticized for failing to protect Jewish students from an increase in anti-Semitic attacks during Israel's war in Gaza. 3 university presidents were called to testify before the House Education Committee. The University of Pennsylvania president resigned under pressure after her responses to questioning.
Why does that professor still have a job at your university?
I'm very troubled by what you're describing, Congressman, that kind of...
You're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. You're defending it. You allow these professors to teach at your college. You create a safe haven for this type of anti-Semitic behavior.
Here's a few cases to highlight from the Supreme Court this year. The Supreme Court ruled that mifepristone, an abortion drug, can remain on U.S. markets. The decision is seen as a victory for the national abortion rights movement. The court overturned Alabama's election map, saying the state had diluted the power of black voters by drawing a map with only 1 black district. The court also ruled that race-conscious admissions processes at Harvard and North Carolina were unlawful. This could have sweeping impacts on admissions at universities across the United States, as universities try to find out how to have student bodies that reflect the makeup of the country without running afoul of the Supreme Court's decision. The court also ruled that a web designer has a right to refuse service to same-sex couples, which was a setback for LGBTQ+ rights. The Supreme Court also dealt a blow to President Joe Biden's effort to forgive large amounts of student loan debt. The court ruled that the HEROES Act, a law that President Biden was using to allow people to delay payments on student loans and forgive large portions of them, did not grant the president the right to do that. And so the president has had to go back to the drawing board and find new mechanisms within the role of the executive.
I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible. We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act.
A major story this year at the Supreme Court wasn't even about the rulings, it was about the justices. News reports showed that Justice Clarence Thomas hadn't disclosed luxury trips with Republican donor Harlan Crow and other transactions going back 20 years. So the justices, under pressure, came up with an ethics code that they released, but there's no mechanism to enforce it. It's really on the justices themselves and an honor system to abide by them. And also this year, former President Donald Trump walked into this courthouse and became the first former president to ever be formally indicted and arraigned on federal charges. He's facing charges here for trying to overturn the 2020 election and setting in motion a series of events that led to the January 6th violent assault on the U.S. Capitol. President Trump is also facing charges in 3 other courtrooms, not 1 charge, but 91 charges. And the outcome of those cases that will play out over the next couple of years could very well determine Donald Trump's political future and how the justice system can deal with a former president who is also running for office and facing charges at the same time.